Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on your report, Dr. Vedino, and ask you about the aspect of it where you noted that there's largely an untapped opportunity to leverage American ISIS recruits that have become disillusioned with the cause, and that these individuals have dropped out for a variety of reasons, whether experiencing the brutality of life under ISIS firsthand or finding a more positive outlet for the quest that led them to ISIS in the first place. And that you noted that we would do well to provide avenues for their stories to be amplified to help dissuade would-be recruits. Could you explain that to us and just let us know, first of all, how many Americans do you think that would constitute? I'm just curious. And, what are the reasons they've become disillusioned, and how could we use them to help us get at this issue? And then I'm going to ask a dual question to all of you after that is, how do we get the message out as to what life is like for women in ISIS? Because as I understand it, that the way that they are portraying the role of women in how they're marketing it is quite different than the reality of being engaged with ISIS or obviously traveling to Iraq and Syria and joining up with the caliphate if you're a woman. So Dr. Vedino, I'm going to have you address the American issue, and then if people could jump in on women and how ISIS treats women, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Senator. What we advocate, and again, this is an idea that has been floating around in the Department of Justice and in other quarters, is the idea that, as we said earlier, there's a very powerful message that can be sent by people who are part of ISIS or in general the jihadist movement. I think you're right that we're probably going to find some difficulties in finding a lot of Americans that have left ISIS. It's not really public information. I would argue there probably are some very isolated cases you would find. We can definitely find more people who are Al-Qaeda linked or anyways jihadist rated. We have a whole wave of people who are coming out of prison now. These are the people who were sort of arrested post 9/11, were the sort of the second tier guys, the people who didn't go to fight, and mostly people who were convicted for material support and got 10, 15 years, and they're coming out of prison now. There's really no de-radicalization program in the US prison system, but some of these people are coming out de-radicalized on their own, reformed. That's a very powerful message. We go back to, it's the message, but it's also the messenger. The legitimacy that somebody that has maybe served time in jail, maybe even went to Afghanistan, to Yemen, and can come back and say, listen, the stories that we were fed are lies. The reality is completely different. That messenger is so much more powerful than the countless books the four of us can write here. So we argue that in some cases, whether it's people coming out of prison, whether it's people who in one way or the other are living in the States, or even better, if we have people coming back from ISIS, obviously, if they have committed crimes, nobody argues that's a way to get away with not being prosecuted and not being responsible for what they did. But since we know that there are cases of sort of borderline cases, with the proper considerations, I think there's such a powerful counter-messaging tool there that it should be used. It's sort of a gutsy and alternative way of dealing with the problem, but I think we do need new solutions, and I think that's an important one. Definitely we have some of those that come from the old guard, let's put it like that, the Al-Qaeda milieu, people who were active 4 or 5 years ago, and I think that's very powerful.
Who would like to go first on addressing how they're recruiting women and the realities versus how we get that message out to women in particular?
I think, as Lorenzo and Dr. Stern both brought up, that the issue of using formers could be a very powerful tool. But I'd also like to posit that oftentimes a lot of these, the would-be recruits are very skeptical of messages that could even come from a former, but that it's very much focused on what they consider to be propaganda against the caliphate. So I think it's also valuable to think of not only what we're against, but what we actually stand for. So not just telling girls why they shouldn't go, but why should they stay? And I think that that requires, whether it's, you know, a Muslim mentor or some other kind of social network that gives them a motivation for saying, you know, I am Muslim, I am British, I'm American, and this is my country, and I feel part of it, and I have, you know, a faith that provides me, you know, the spiritual and the intellectual needs that I have. And I think that's a much more complicated question, but it's definitely something we need to get to, because we need a positive message, not just a counter message.
Am I missing something, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I thought they were misrepresenting really to women what the reality was. And maybe I'm wrong about that. I just would like to understand.
No, what I mean is that they don't believe when we say they're mistreated.
Okay, I understand.
So we say
Right.
they treat you terribly. They make you, you know, wear a burqa. You don't ever get to go out. They don't feed you. Like, you're lying. You're making
Oh,
it up.
they think we're misrepresenting.
They think
the
we're
source.
misrepresenting it.
Professor? Oh.
Here, I think it's important to highlight the work of a woman, Humaira Khan, who's really working one-on-one with young people and young women who believe this narrative. I think this kind of work really needs to be supported. Of course they're lying. They're saying you get to be a jihadi wife. They don't get to say you get to be a jihadi wife 1 month with one guy, 1 month with the next, or maybe one day. Yes, we need to get those stories out, but I think the one-on-one approach that Humaira Khan is involved in is very useful. That's what I'll say.
The recruitment to ISIS provides meaning and structure to individuals. I don't think it's gendered. I think that women are as attracted to the meaning and structure that ISIS provides when they're recruited. And ISIS itself is extremely adept in its propaganda, in using women in its propaganda. So you see this in their online magazines, but also, for instance, one of their principal ideologues today, one of their principal thinkers, who's writing poetry and treatises on Islam, is a woman. Her name is Ahlam al-Nasr. And they have a brigade of female morality police that roams the streets. So they're, you know, the way they present themselves to the outside world and to potential recruits is that this is a terrific place, and women can lead meaningful lives and also produce the next generation of fighters, which is a duty for Islam as a religion and for the caliphate itself. Unfortunately, the testimony of former slaves, so I'm here thinking about someone called Nadia Murad, who's an amazing woman, a Yazidi who was enslaved and testified at the UN, and also has given many interviews. I mean, if you listen to her, you really, I mean, tears well up in your eyes, but it's had almost no effect, as far as I can tell, throughout the Arab world, because she's othered. She's seen as something outside the community, and sometimes she's not even believed. They think that this is disinformation against the caliphate.
Thank you.